Welcome to the Bookish Breakdown YouTube channel with Lem and Abby. I'm liking this guy, James E. Files, as the actual shooter. Did he shoot JFK? This story is pretty convincing and it fits the timeline. Let's talk about it, shall we? Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Whoa, that's quite the opening for a YouTube video, wouldn't you say?
It definitely grabs your attention right off the bat. Jumps right into the thick of it, doesn't it?
No kidding. We're talking about the JFK assassination here, and this guy, James E. Files, is claiming he's the shooter.
Yeah, and not just any shooter, he's placing himself on the Grassy Knoll right in the middle of all the conspiracy theories.
Exactly. So today, we're going deep into these YouTube interviews with James E. Files. We've got the transcripts, and we're going to unpack everything he says.
Right. Who was he with? What was his motivation? How does he say it all went down? And of course, the big one, the cover-up.
We're getting into all of it. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. Was James E. Files even in Dealey Plaza that day? According to him, at least. Well, he says he was. He claims he got to Dealey Plaza a little before 10 a.m. on November 22nd, 1963.
And he says he wasn't just there to watch the motorcade go by.
Nope. Files says he brought a whole arsenal of weapons to Dallas with one goal in mind: assassinate President Kennedy.
Wow. That's a bold statement right there.
No question.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, why? Why was he allegedly there, and who supposedly put him up to it?
Right. Files claims he got a call about 6 months before the assassination from a guy named Charles Nicoletti. That name might ring a bell for some of you true crime buffs out there.
Yeah, organized crime connections. So what was Files' motivation? Why would he agree to something like this?
Files says he had a huge grudge against JFK, stemming from the Bay of Pigs invasion. He says he wasn't directly involved in the fighting itself, but he trained some of the operatives. He mentions a place called Gator Ridge.
Right, in Florida. And like a lot of the Cuban exiles, he felt completely betrayed by Kennedy's decision to withhold air support during the invasion.
He definitely holds that against Kennedy. He also throws in that his CIA handler at the time was David Atlee Phillips. He says Phillips was the one providing weapons to the Cuban exiles.
So Files is already connecting himself to the CIA and the Bay of Pigs.
Exactly. And then Nicoletti drops the bomb on him. Files says Nicoletti told him they were going to do his friend.
His friend?
Yeah, and then he clarified he meant President Kennedy. Files claims he was shocked at first, but then he agreed to be a part of it.
So he's already implicated Nicoletti in the CIA. Anyone else?
Oh yeah, he drops another big name, Johnny Roselli.
Roselli, as in the mobster Johnny Roselli.
The one and only. Files says he knew him from Miami, says they met through, you guessed it, David Atlee Phillips.
That Phillips guy seems to be everywhere in Files' story.
He's a key figure for sure. Files also mentions that he basically grew up around organized crime figures like Nicoletti, so he was no stranger to that world.
Interesting. So he's claiming connections to both the CIA and the mob.
That's right, and it gets even crazier. He claims the original plan was to kill Kennedy in Chicago.
Chicago? But it all went down in Dallas.
Right. Files says the Chicago plan wasn't popular with a lot of people. He doesn't specify who, so they switched it to Dallas.
Makes you wonder who these people were.
I know, right? So Files says he drives to Dallas a whole week before the assassination in a '63 Chevy. He had all his weapons and supplies stashed in a bin.
He was prepared.
Yeah, he even called Nicoletti when he got there to say he was on the scene, like he was reporting for duty.
You stayed in a motel in Mesquite, right?
That's the one. And here's where things get really interesting. Files claims that Lee Harvey Oswald shows up at his motel the very next day.
Oswald? Hold on. So Files is putting Oswald in Dallas before the assassination.
Yep. He says Oswald was given his location. They spend a few days together driving southeast of Mesquite to test out weapons and adjust scopes.
Wow. Okay, so what was Oswald's role in all of this, according to Files?
This is the wild part. Files says that he and Oswald never actually discussed the assassination. He claims Oswald was just there to help out, run errands, things like that.
That's a tough one to swallow. Why would Oswald be doing all this if he didn't know what was going on?
Files suggest that Oswald was also working for the CIA and had the same handler, David Atlee Phillips.
So he's saying they were both CIA operatives working on some kind of mission together.
That's how he's painting it. But he doesn't give any hard evidence to back that up.
Right. It's all just his word at this point.
Exactly. But let's keep going. We're getting close to the day of the assassination. Files says that by November 21st, he was all set. He knew the area, his weapons were ready, everything.
So he was just waiting for the green light.
Pretty much. Now, on the morning of the 22nd, around 7 a.m., Files claims he picked up Johnny Roselli from the Dallas Cabana Hotel.
Roselli was in Dallas too. Man, this is a tangled web.
Tell me about it. Then they drove to a pancake house in Fort Worth to meet Jack Ruby.
Hold up. Jack Ruby, as in the guy who shot Oswald.
That's the one. Files says they met him to pick up some things. He doesn't say exactly what.
That's awfully convenient, isn't it? But he doesn't implicate Ruby in the shooting itself.
Not directly. But he does say that Nicoletti called him later that morning, around 10:30, and gave him the order to shoot JFK.
So it was a last-minute decision.
That's what Files says. Nicoletti told him he was the backup shooter in case the others missed.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the weapon Files claims he used. What did he say about that?
He claims that David Atlee Phillips, our favorite CIA guy, gave him a Remington Fireball rifle.
And he just happened to have that lying around.
Files says Phillips told him it had been used for other work before. And get this, he says they even had special bullets made for this gun, designed to fragment and explode when they hit bone. They were traveling super fast, too, like 3,100 feet per second.
That's insanely specific.
Right. Files says he took 6 of those rounds. But he also claims he didn't actually get a direct hit on Kennedy.
Wait, he didn't hit Kennedy directly, but Kennedy was obviously shot.
I know, right? It's confusing. He's implying that someone else fired the fatal shot, but he doesn't say who.
Okay, so where was Files when he allegedly took this shot?
He says he was behind a fence, which pretty much means he was on the Grassy Knoll.
That lines up with a lot of the conspiracy theories. So, Files, Roselli, they were all in Dealey Plaza during the assassination. What about Jack Ruby? He met them earlier that morning, right? Was he there too?
Files claims Ruby was there, standing on the same side of the street as the Grassy Knoll, but with his back to Files.
So according to Files, Ruby was there, but not necessarily involved in the shooting itself.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
So what happens after the shooting? Files claims he just calmly walked away from Dealey Plaza.
And just walked away, just like that.
He even says he walked right past 2 police officers who were stopped by someone pretending to be Secret Service.
Someone was impersonating Secret Service. This is getting deeper and deeper.
And nobody even questioned Files as he left.
That's a pretty bold claim, considering the chaos that supposedly erupted after the shooting.
I know, right? But it gets weirder. Files claims that there was another person, not part of the main hit squad, who was supposed to kill Oswald. He says this guy showed up at his motel later that day and admitted to killing a cop.
He's talking about Officer J.D. Tippit, the officer who was shot shortly after the assassination.
Right. Files claims Oswald didn't kill Tippit, that this other guy did it to make Oswald look guilty.
So he's basically saying Oswald was framed. Okay, let's talk about the government and CIA involvement. Files made some pretty big claims about that.
Oh, yeah. He believes the government and the CIA were heavily involved in the whole thing. He even claims they gave out fake Secret Service IDs to various people. And remember that Remington Fireball rifle?
The one Phillips supposedly gave him.
That's the one. Files says that while Phillips did give him the gun, it wasn't specifically for Kennedy at that time.
Interesting. So who does he say actually ordered him to kill Kennedy?
Files says it wasn't the CIA directly. He claims he got his orders from Nicoletti, who was allegedly taking orders from Sam Giancana.
So it all goes back to the mob.
That's Files' story. He even suggests that Tony Accardo might have been involved too, since Giancana wouldn't have given an order like that without Accardo's approval.
So he's placing the order within organized crime, but with implied CIA connections and knowledge.
Exactly. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that many other people, including people in the military, the Secret Service, even Kennedy's own staff, disliked him.
He seems to be suggesting that Kennedy had a lot of enemies.
He definitely does.
Yeah.
He mentions Kennedy's bad habits, but doesn't really elaborate on what those were.
He also claims that Kennedy was trying to dismantle the CIA, which led to the decision to take him out.
Right. He paints this picture of Kennedy as a threat to a lot of powerful people, and he also drops a bombshell saying that the mob actually helped Kennedy get elected through voter fraud.
Wow. That's a huge accusation.
And he doesn't stop there. He claims Kennedy wasn't going to choose LBJ as his running mate for the next election either.
Okay, hold on. This is getting really wild. But what about the fates of the people he claims were involved? Giancana, Roselli, Nicoletti?
Well, Files points out that all 3 of them ended up dead before they could testify about any of this. Giancana was murdered in June 1975, right before he was scheduled to appear before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence.
And Roselli.
Roselli did testify before the committee in 1976, but he was murdered before he could give a second testimony.
And Nicoletti.
Files says Nicoletti was killed shortly after the House Committee on Assassinations announced they were going to call him to testify in 1977.
That's a pretty chilling pattern. It almost sounds like someone was trying to silence them.
Right. And then there's Files himself. He was serving a 50-year sentence for shooting a policeman in Illinois when he gave these interviews.
So what was his motivation for coming forward with all this?
He claims he didn't get any money for the interviews. He says he's mainly doing it because of the interviewer, Joe West, who he seems to respect. He also claims he's had threats on his life from both organized crime and the government.
He's putting himself in a pretty dangerous position if what he's saying is true.
Yeah, he definitely is. He claims that the FBI has tried to discredit him, but he says he's given information about certain special operations that only someone on the inside would know.
So he's trying to prove he's credible.
Right. He also mentions that he got a letter from a woman named Pamela while he was in prison. She had read a book about his confession and wanted to get in touch.
And she eventually became his wife.
Yeah. They started writing letters and eventually got married. He even mentions that there's a movie based on his confession called I Killed Kennedy.
Wow. Okay, so did he ever express any remorse for the assassination?
He says it's hard to feel remorse for something that happened so long ago. And he claims that at the time, he felt it was the right thing to do because he disliked Kennedy so much.
He doesn't seem too bothered by it.
Not really. He keeps bringing up the Bay of Pigs as his main justification.
All right, so he's made all these claims, but does he address any of the evidence that contradicts his story?
He denies knowing how Nicoletti got to Dallas, just says he probably flew commercial. But he does say that Roselli flew on a military transport plane, possibly arranged by the CIA.
He's still connecting Roselli to the CIA.
And he claims that only Roselli and Nicoletti knew he was in Dealey Plaza that day.
So no other witnesses to back up his story.
Right. But he doesn't just talk about the assassination. He also claims to have worked with the CIA on a bunch of other stuff, like training Cubans for the Bay of Pigs and other secret missions.
He's really trying to paint himself as this seasoned CIA operative.
He is. He mentions this Navy birthing program and being recruited by David Phillips after he was in a veterans hospital. He even tells a story about General Lansdale being in charge in Dallas, calling him the Kingmaker.
So he's dropping names and trying to establish his insider knowledge.
Exactly. He also claims that he only found out he was the shooter on the morning of the assassination. And get this, he says he saw George H.W. Bush Sr. in Dealey Plaza that day.
Whoa. He's really throwing everything into the mix here.
He doesn't hold back. He claims the Zapruder film has been altered, that Kennedy was trying to dismantle the CIA, and that the mob helped Kennedy get elected. He also says that Oswald didn't kill Officer Tippit and was set up, and that Jack Ruby was given cancer in jail to stop him from talking.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. He's basically claiming that there was this massive conspiracy involving the mob, CIA, and even LBJ.
And he doesn't just stop at the JFK assassination. He goes on to talk about other events like the downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007, the death of Dorothy Hunt, and even Jimmy Hoffa.
He seems to see conspiracies everywhere.
He definitely does. He even alleges that LBJ was in charge of the Texas division of the assassination plot and that his own hitman killed LBJ's sister. And he claims that Jimmy Hoffa was incinerated, not buried.
Wow. So basically, he's woven this whole narrative where he's at the center of this huge web of conspiracy.
That's exactly what he's done. He's saying he was the shooter on the Grassy Knoll, that Roselli was there, and that Oswald was just a pawn.
And his main motivation was revenge for the Bay of Pigs, with the order coming from the top of the mob.
He gives specific details about the weapon he used, his location, and how he got away. He also offers his own theories on what happened to Officer Tippit and his alleged co-conspirators.
It's a compelling story, but it's also important to remember that it's just one man's account. There's no real evidence to back up a lot of his claims.
That's true. And a lot of what he says contradicts the official investigations.
Exactly. So what do you think? Does any of this resonate with you? Does any specific detail jump out?
It's definitely a lot to process. When you hear someone like James E. Files talk about these events, it makes you wonder what really happened that day in Dallas.
It challenges our understanding of history, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you question the official narratives and wonder if there's more to the story than we've been told.
And that's what makes this so fascinating, isn't it? The search for the truth, even if it's elusive.
Exactly. We encourage you to do your own research, look into the available evidence, and draw your own conclusions. And if you want to hear James E. Files tell his story in his own words, you can find the full interviews on YouTube channels like Documentary Central and The Todd Wagner Show.
That's right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring,
And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Bookish Breakdown channel for more deep dives into the world of conspiracy and history.